Do you like sports? Do you like art? What about science? Giraffes? Giraffe scientists that paint rugby games? It's all available on Audible, the biggest audiobook site with the largest selection of audiobooks this side of the inner solar system. No need to use your boring old eyes anymore. The ears are the future, my friend. Why, you're using them right now. So check out Audible and get your listen on. Go to www.readlearnlivepodcast.com/audible to start your 30-day free trial today.
And then she got bored with him and left him for a woman who was one of her fans who would see her perform, and they ran away together. And this girl's parents sent her to a convent, which Julie followed her to, and the two of them burned it to the ground and ran away.
Hello and welcome to Read, Learn, Live, the podcast about improving yourself through literature. I'm your acclaimed host, John Monaster, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 59, where we can finally start pulling money from our sweet 401k. As always, if you have ideas for books you'd like to see featured or of authors you want to put me in touch with, you can reach me at jon@readlearnlivepodcast.com. Today, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with essayist Caitlin Grace McDonnell about her essay in the essay collection Fierce, Essays by and About Dauntless Women. Caitlin Grace McDonnell was a New York Times Fellow in Poetry at NYU and has received fellowships from Yaddo, Blue Mountain Center, and the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. Her poems and essays have been published widely, most recently in Fierce, Essays for and About Dauntless Women from Nauset Press. She published a chapbook of poems, Dreaming the Tree, in Belladonna in 2003, and a book titled Looking for Small Animals in 2012. Currently, she teaches English at CUNY, lives in Brooklyn with her 10-year-old daughter, and is at work on a novel. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. All right, hello everyone and welcome to the Read, Learn, Live podcast. I'm your host, John Monaster. I am extremely excited today to be talking about the book Fierce, Essays by and About Dauntless Women, edited by Karen Klauman, and I have one of the authors here with me, Caitlin Grace McDonnell. Caitlin, say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm really excited to talk about this because I think it's a wonderful collection of essays, and I'm really excited to talk to you about yours and learn more all about it. So just to kind of kick things off, just to give my listeners kind of a base here, what is Fierce? What is this book all about?
It's about different women who have fascinating stories that have mostly been left out of common historical narratives, but who have helped shape our culture in their own ways. And it's written by also fascinating culture-shaping women, if I dare say so myself.
You sure can.
And most people had a personal, or really everyone had a personal connection in some way to the person that they ended up writing a biographical essay about. So they all the essays also have an autobiographical component.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did you first get connected with this project and Karen, and how did you ultimately decide to participate?
So Karen and I went to college together years ago at Bard College, and we were a group of women and started a women's magazine on campus, and Karen and I were part of that group. It lasted for a couple issues and then fell apart, but so we've sort of vaguely kept in touch since then, and then years later, she got in touch when she started Nauset Press because she knew I had a poetry manuscript that I'd been, entering in contests. Sometimes it would be like a finalist, but I'd been trying for a while to get it published, and it's quite hard in the poetry world to break through with your first book. And so she offered to publish it with her press she was starting, which was lovely. And then so then when I saw she put a call for essays online, I think it was on a Facebook group about Fierce when she was starting it. And I got in touch because I had been wanting to write about my great grandmother, and I thought it would be maybe a good match. And she said, I'd love for you to write an essay, but I want you to write it about one of these people that I've already chosen, but why don't you use it as a vehicle to also talk about your great grandmother, which is what wound up happening.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's interesting that Karen kind of had her own list. You had this personal connection, and like we'll talk about, I think they really went well together.
Yeah, they
Um, so how did you actually start once you once you said, I'm in? How did you go about doing the research and writing of this? I know in the essay you talk about looking at newspapers, old archives.
mhm.
It seems like this was a lot, and could have been a bit overwhelming. How did you decide ultimately where to focus your efforts, and how to find out more information on everyone you looked at?
Well, so I already had this copy of this book that my great grandmother wrote called The Art of Fencing. And I also had relatives who had stories about her. So with that's and then I started looking through archives of old newspaper clippings because one of my aunts really knew a lot about her, and I hadn't realized what a sort of public figure she was. So there's quite a few newspaper articles about her that I found online. And then in terms of Julie Daubigny, I was grateful because there were a couple of researchers who had done a lot of legwork already. A woman, Kelly Gardner, who I think went on to actually write a novel about her, and a man, Jim Burrows. So I relied a lot on research they had already done, and other stuff that I found online, mostly about her.
Okay, that's great to have a good jumping off point like that.
Yeah.
So knowing that, you had this process, you started working through it. Was there anything that you found particularly difficult or hard?
Writing essays is something that I don't do all the time. And what I wound up writing was something that I didn't even know there was a name for, which is called a braided essay, where you're braiding different narratives together. But I just sort of did that by improvisation. And so it was hard for me sometimes to find the right balance of my story and Julie's story and my great grandmother Eleanor's story, and also just editing. There were many drafts before it was right.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something that I hear from a lot of authors is the amount of tuning and editing that really goes in behind the scenes over and over again.
Yeah,
So it's like you finish your draft, but that still leaves you quite a ways away from what a reader ends up reading, and that can be sometimes invisible.
yeah.
Huh. Well, okay, well let's talk about let's we buried the lead long enough. Let's talk about all these dauntless women.
Okay.
So your essay connects Eleanor Baldwin Cass, your great grandmother,
Hmm.
Julie Duabigny. I'm going to keep trying to pronounce
Yep.
French, not my first language,
Yeah.
um, but I think that was all right. And then a bit of both of them to you. So let's talk about all of them. So I want to start off with sort of your assignment. So who was Julie?
So she was a 17th century master swordswoman, bisexual opera star who lived a really unconventional life for her time. She grew up in wealth because her father worked for royalty. She grew up in the stables of Versailles, at least for the
Mm,
later part of her childhood, because her father helped take care of the horses. But it meant she was educated um, like a boy, both in terms of books and fencing. And so she ended up having a kind of freedom that a lot of females at her time didn't have.
okay, yeah. And so then connecting her to Eleanor, your great grandmother. So who was Eleanor, and what parallels were you able to draw to Julie?
Well, they were both fencers and performers, and they both lived a kind of unconventional female life for their time. Um, I my great grandmother was married, but lived a lot of her adult life alone in a New York City hotel. So there's I don't know the details of her personal life, but my sisters and cousins and I like to speculate that her marriage wasn't necessarily her only romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And she also just she had a kind of they both had a kind of androgyny to them, um, and a fierceness. Uh, and for my great grandmother, she was also a mother and a mother of my grandfather, and her ideas about motherhood were also important.
And so let's add in the final person there. Who are you? Tell me about yourself and your family history, and how you feel connected to the first two women.
Well, I don't fence. It's funny though, because when I was writing this essay, my daughter was doing jujitsu pretty seriously. She's not doing it anymore, but I ended up writing it like outside her jujitsu studio, waiting for her to be out of class a lot of the time. So I was thinking about like, oh, maybe this does run genetically, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm a poet, a teacher, a mother. I grew up in Boulder, Colorado, with two sisters and an adventurous mother. I think it's fair to say I also live a kind of unconventional life, and my sisters do too. None of us have married. We all have interesting, full lives, are artists, and just sort of create life on our own terms, I'd say.
Let's go back in time. I mean, your descriptions of Julie are, they're pretty fantastic, and just reading about her for a little bit, and then you kind of drop the bombshell, and this all happened before she turned 17, and it was just like, wow, like this person is living life,
Kind
and
of unfathomable. What's happened before
yeah,
17.
yeah, really. And so I'm just curious, like, how did this progression happen? She was wealthy, she was raised, she studied a lot, she kind of started from a certain place. But how did she get started in fencing and really excel there? And then how did she go from fencing to opera and being such a performer?
Well, as I say, she was raised. Her father worked for the Count Armagnac. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but
It sounds good.
she was raised in Versailles, and so she learned to fence because that was just sort of the training that the boys were getting around her is fencing and education, and she just excelled at it from an early age. And she I guess she just must have been a charismatic, adventurous spirit from the beginning. It's one of the things thinking about this question of all of these things that happened before she was 17 and the kind of things I was writing about her were like, oh, the Count took a liking to her, and so she was married off to Mapen. It's like she was a kid, is one of the things that has been, striking me is that it's not, I mean, in 2019, I think a lot of what happened to her would be defined as rape, because she was a child for part of the
Yeah.
time. But in any case, that's not the narrative that I encountered. It was more, about her life on her terms. So this count that worked, that her father worked for, fell in love with her, and she. So I think maybe partially in reaction to that, or she was married off to this tax collector, Monsieur Maupin. So she was sometimes called Le Maupin in her time as an opera star or whatever. Okay, a little bit about the trajectory. So when she was married off to him, but then she left him and started. He sort of was remote and supportive, is the gist I get for all of her life. This person who she was married to, like he would support her sometimes. I think at various points they may have checked in and lived together briefly, but he let her live her own life and helped her financially. But so she left the count and for a traveling fencing instructor and performer named Saron, and they traveled around Marseille performing at taverns. And she began singing with the Opera de Marseille. And then she got bored with him and left him for a woman who was one of her fans who would see her perform, and they ran away together. And this girl's parents sent her to a convent, which Julie followed her to, and the two of them burned it to the ground and ran away. And then she took the parents really took the girl away then, and Julie was sort of wanted from the law at that point, and she took up with a nobleman who thought she was, because she would dress like a man a lot of the time. So he thought she was a man and challenged her to a duel. And she won, and the two of them fell in love, and traveled around performing for a while, and then she got bored with him. And then she met Gabriel Thivenard, and they auditioned for the stage in Paris. And in order to do that, she needed to be forgiven for burning convents to the ground. so,
Yeah.
so she called on the Count, and he helped her get forgiven for her crimes. So all that happened before she was 17, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's incredible.
I know.
So yeah, I think one of the things that the common threads between the two women here, Eleanor and Julie, is that they were performers. I mean, they fenced, they performed. Uh, what is your sense of what makes someone a good performer here? Why were they both so successful?
Yeah, I don't know. I I'm not sure I know what makes someone a good performer. I think that um, I'm probably more of an introvert than either of the two people I wrote about. They sound like pretty extroverted characters, but I'm not even sure that all good performers are extroverts.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think maybe it's something about appearing to really have fun and a generosity of spirit and a willingness to sort of shun conventional expectations. I'm not sure.
Hmm. Those all sound like good directions to think through, and definitely both Eleanor and Julie definitely shunned conventional expectations.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, and then in terms of you talked a little bit in the essay about how, and like we mentioned, you don't really fence, but you did draw a comparison to arguing and debating, and that you like a good argument, and that was something common amongst your family. And I'm just curious to know what draws you to that really. I think there are a lot of people for whom an argument is something very negative, something to avoid,
Hmm.
and it seems like you embrace the idea of a debate as a way of understanding truth, maybe. And so how did that work for you, and how does that inclination affect your relationships?
That's a big and interesting question. I mean, I think that I like what you said, that it can be a way of, what did you say, of finding truth or embracing truth, or
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's at its best. It's that I don't think it's always the healthiest thing. I mean, there was intellectual debate in my family of origin, but there was also fighting, and
Sure.
so and my dad was a lawyer, and he was good at argument. I think he recognized that in me as well, and he used to say he thought I should be a lawyer, um, which who knows, maybe I would have if he didn't encourage it. I rebelled against that and went for the money with poetry. Um,
Nice.
but yeah, I mean, I do. I don't know, I've used the word spar. Like I do sometimes um, enjoy a kind of playful argument. I enjoy debating to get at truth, and I work on something that I think that it's taken work for me to let go of trying to be right all the time, and prioritize love over being right. Because I think that my childhood, um, I don't know, steered me into a direction of like fighting in that way sometimes. I'm sure, there are definitely people in my life who would say I still have work to do in that department.
Yeah, I think I see. I totally understand where you're coming from. My dad is also a lawyer. He's a public defender, and I see that same ability to debate and think about things in that context. And I also need to, and I'm always working on that point you just raised about being right versus love and relationships and friendships, and it's not always important to be right. And I think understanding when it is and isn't is a big part, for me at least, of growing up and maturing.
Yeah, it's a lifelong process.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, one of the things it was just a fun thought experiment, but Julie and Eleanor, were obviously around in very different times, and it's curious to think about, the extent to which they may be products of their times, or they may have fit in so well, both because of their personalities and because of the time they live in. So, I was wondering the extent to which you thought they would still be who they were in our society today, and how they might fit in or not, and how people might view their actions.
Yeah, it's interesting. Um, well, I mean, this is an interesting time for women in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like gender roles are changing. At the same time, misogyny and a kind of war on women's rights are also sort of peaking in a way that they haven't um, in years. And the consciousness is changing with like the Me Too movements, and fewer women are getting married, and gender's more fluid. Like kids, even my kids, my daughter's age, are gender fluid in a way that we weren't. And so it's hard to imagine because both of them were, they were celebrities in their time, in part because they were ahead of their time, and because they didn't take the prescribed roles of their time. And so who knows, if they were who they are internally and they were here in 2019, I think they would be rebelling against different things. Or and if they came here as they were, it's hard to say. I mean, I think of people like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and uh, who is who is a kind of role model for lots of young women right now, in part because she just doesn't give a shit and says it like it is, and is speaking truth to power. And I think that, I mean, Julie broke a lot of laws. She was a rebel, but she also, I don't know, she also shunned patriarchal prescriptions in a way that I think made her a role model.
And speaking of Julie, I was saddened to hear that she passed away very very young,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious to know what happened. I think it was 33 she passed away. I mean, what were the later years of her life like? Did she ever sort of settle down, or did she just kind of max out until the end?
I I think at some point she did cohabitate with Mopen, who she had married, but at the end of her life, she had a last love affair. It was with a woman, Madame la Marquise de Florensac, who was known to be this very beautiful woman in French society. and they lived together and until the Madame de Fronsac passed away, and then Julie entered a convent at the very end of her life and was in grief um, until she died.
Mm. And and to connect you and Eleanor, I also want to think about, well, I mean, broadly, you talked about reaching out to all of your relatives and talking with them and learning about Eleanor and who she was. And from that, you talked about the rejection of traditional parenting roles
Yeah.
and how Eleanor really talked a lot about parenting and motherhood and what that meant to her. And you feel like you have something in common there. And what was that?
Yeah. Um, yeah. One of the newspaper clippings I found, I forget what the name of it was. So it was the title was something like "Somersaults on the Front Lawn" or something, and it was all about how much she liked to play with her kids and how she felt like it sort of kept her young. And I also enjoy playing with my daughter. Um, we have like living room dance parties together sometimes, and I enjoy a kind of like mixed generational socializing sometimes where we'll have like a game night with kids and adults. And I mean, she's going to become a teenager, which is going to make that different. But I've never been into the parenting books that tell you how you're doing everything wrong or um,
Yeah.
I think it's like another human relationship that we have to figure out between two individuals. And I do my best. She's the greatest love for me. I fail sometimes, but I do believe that it's a relationship between two people. As much it's which I do. It sounds like Eleanor believed as well that not just to be that of course authority is part of it, but also to really know your kids and celebrate life with them. I have an aunt who actually on my father's side who's also has always been kind of aside from my mother, who's also a role model for mothering. My aunt has been a big role model for mothering as well, and she's still her kids are adults and they still like go perform singing together at pubs, and they're friends as well as being mothers and daughters.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And I think that's a great thing to aspire to. And it's great that you have role models like that,
Yeah,
both in people that you're learning about and people that are in your life right now.
yeah, thank you.
So those were kind of the questions I had, and I wanted to check in, and I always like to ask: were there any other ideas or anything else you hoped people would take away from your essay that we haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet?
Um, Not really. I when I was writing it was also around the 2016 election, so I was pretty obsessed with that, as were a lot of people. And I like a lot of people when Hillary Clinton started running, I saw her baggage because of having been the wife of Bill Clinton, but I really ended up getting behind her, and um, and so I somehow like it was impossible to not include something about that as I wrote this, and it just feels like such a time in our culture about
Hmm.
about power and women and what happens if a woman the rejects patriarchy or the roles feminine roles that are assigned, and could we actually um, can our culture actually embrace a female leader? Fuck, I hope so. It hasn't happened yet, but I really hope so.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Um, so now that people have heard all about your essay, so there are 13 essays total. So there's 12 others that people should read about other Dauntless women that are great.
Yes.
Where can people buy the book if they're interested?
Well, Nasip Press has a website. You can order it directly from there, or it's on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And there's a new hardcover available, which I have not seen yet, but I'm sure is very beautiful, that you can order through Barnes and Noble. And it's also available on Nook or Kindle as an ebook now.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, and what else are you up to? What else are you working on? Is there anything else you'd like to share right now about things that you're passionate about, any other projects or things that excite you?
Sure. I'm still writing. I'm working on a new book of poems that I keep tinkering with called, for now, My Father's Hat, and an autobiographical novel about dating as a menopausal woman in the age of Trump.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I am excited to read all of those. So let me know when they are done.
I will.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah. Okay, Thunder Round time. I'm going to ask you some quick getting to know you questions, and then we'll call it a day. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. First off, what is your favorite food and or drink?
I really like food that like comes in little present forms, like dumplings and tacos, things that are wrapped up.
Oh, okay.
And
Empanadas, cannolis. Okay.
yes, and raviolis. Although I haven't been doing as much gluten these days, but I've become interested a little bit in mixology. I like to invent cocktails.
Ooh. Do you have a particular big one you've invented or exciting one you've invented?
These days I've been working with lavender bitters, mezcal, some herbs, some rosé. So yeah, different. I need to start naming them.
You do.
Yeah.
You maybe name them after Dauntless women.
Interesting idea. Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
La Maupin.
There you go. I mean, those all sound great, by the way. I particularly enjoy mezcal. I like the smokiness of it all.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, where is your favorite place you've ever been?
Well, I did feel romantic reading about Julie because I really do love Paris, and I've been there twice. I want to go back. Lieutenant's Island and Cape Cod is very important to me. My father had a cottage there where I've spent a lot of time. It's now sold, but the woman who bought it took pity on me and she rents it to me for really cheap, so I can still go back. And also I lived in Ireland and Galway for a time, and that place has always been in my heart.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's great to have a couple places like that you can really connect to.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. If you could wave a magic wand and change any one thing, what would it be and why?
It's hard.
I know.
Well, I'm really bad at the one thing, so I'm going to give you two.
Okay, you're allowed.
Like I would definitely want to go back and reverse the catastrophic damage we've done to the planet and the trajectory we're on in terms of climate change. And the results of the 2016 election, or what happened with the 2016 election.
Yeah, those are two big ones that matter.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's more.
Sounds good to me. Yeah. Okay, well, listen, Caitlin, this has been a really wonderful discussion, and I'm so glad I got put in touch with you and Karen, and I want to thank my friend Heather for making that happen. Thanks, Heather, if you're listening.
Oh,
and
Heather.
Yeah, Heather.
She was part of Cacophony with Karen and I at Bard College, actually.
Okay.
Magazine, yeah.
Well, there you go. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, Caitlin, thanks again for joining. I really appreciated talking to you, and
thank you.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Read, Learn, Live. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. If you hated it, tell a friend and subscribe on iTunes and Google Play. And so it goes.